Welcome to What If, So What, the podcast where we ask what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real in your business. I'm Jim Hertzfeld.
And I'm Kim Chopek.
We're part of Perficient's digital strategy team, and today we'll ask what if, so what, and most importantly, now what?
Artificial intelligence continues to be the buzziest of buzzwords, but the reality is it's here, you're probably interacting with it every day and you might not know it, and it's become accessible and scalable for business. Today we talk to Katie King, published author and CEO of AI in Business, to convince us that robots aren't taking over the world and that if you aren't already investing in AI, you're probably behind. Katie, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Greetings from London.
We're excited to talk to you today and hear everything about AI. I know in our prep conversations, we had a lot of good back and forth on, where this conversation could go and, what's the most up-to-date information on AI. But I think one of the first things we sort of landed on was let's redefine what AI is, or more specifically, what isn't AI?
It's a great place to start. Really, we're talking about a family of data science, a type of technology that's been around since the 1950s, but it's really about intelligence, the actual computers demonstrating intelligent human behavior. They're not sentient, they're not creative necessarily, but they can be taught to think like intelligent humans, which is so powerful and so exciting. And what they're not are the big, scary robot who's coming to take your job in marketing, in HR, in finance. That's the myth, and that's what we need to kind of share with people.
I think that's maybe it's funny to people in the industry, this misconception, but it is a very real misconception. So it's good to call that out. Now, in your book, which is great, it covers a lot of ground around AI, but you claim, and I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, there's no business over time that will not be an AI business in some form, which is a very strong, provocative statement. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Definitely. I think I wrote the first book in 2019, and this latest book came out in January of this year. And I'm able to say that now. I couldn't have said that 2 or 3 years ago. And what I really mean by that is every business function, every geography, every industry sector is going to be touched by AI and will be using AI in some form of another. So therefore, they will be a business that's taking advantage of an AI-infused business, for example, using it to do some of their marketing and sales, using it to sift the CVs in their HR. And they could be banks, they could be retailers, they could be construction companies of a tiny size up to, a multinational organization.
That's a lot. And you talked about this. What's the difference, though? You said 2 or 3 years ago, you couldn't have said that. What is the difference between AI today versus 2 to 3 years ago, 5 years ago? What do today's business leaders need to understand about leveraging AI for their business? And you talk about this in your book a little bit, but is it really that accessible for businesses of all sizes to say that it will be part of all business?
Yes, it is accessible. I think 5 years ago, this was still a sci-fi concept. It was in our lives, but we weren't really thinking about it. You had the early adopters exploring it and leading the charge, and they were viewed as the very forward-thinking ones. It would be wrong for me to imply that it's being deployed at scale across every company in every country and in every industry sector, but it is accessible. And that could be as simple as using a point-to-point marketing tool, something like Phrasee or Concurred or one of the many, or it could be MailChimp and using some AI or Brandwatch within your marketing. So it is much more accessible. And if we just stop there for a minute and think about AI in our lives, we are coping with COVID thanks to AI in healthcare. So had the AI not helped the scientists to speed up the discovery for a vaccine, we wouldn't be here now. Well, we would be because we could still be doing this virtually. But, many of us, it's saved a lot of lives. It's enabled us to go back to offices and so on. So it's in our lives for sure. And when I wrote the first book, people didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And there was huge skepticism, whereas now more and more banks, small PR companies, all kinds of organizations are starting to understand it and take small steps, in some instances, right up to major scale implementations.
It's a great point, and kind of, further myth busting AI to say it really is plainly in our lives every day, and we're not maybe seeing the application of AI, in our day to day, but it's there.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very important to think about it. And you're talking about scale. What does it mean to scale AI? And you talk a lot about pragmatism in your book, the pragmatism around AI, which, is all about our what if so what ethos here.
Yep.
So we would love to hear more about that. What are some examples of pragmatism in deploying and scaling AI for business? And more specifically, thinking about our workforce today, how do businesses upskill or hire for AI?
That's a great question, and it's so relevant. And as you say, that's very much my style, is that sort of integrity and being very pragmatic. So we've got a meeting of minds there. I think the biggest consideration for scaling it is having the right talent to support it. And that's going to look very different from, business to business and depending on the actual AI project itself. If you're simply adding AI capabilities to your existing CRM database, for example, then that might be really simple. Hosting a training session with your team, showing them, what's the capabilities are, what the tools are. Or it might be something much bigger. It might be adopting a solution that requires much, much more from your people. So in that case, you might bring people in from outside. It might be about integrating it in. You might be a major retailer and you might be having to integrate some AI into your whole customer journey and all the different touch points within that. And that might require you to outsource that and find the right provider and so on. So what I've got it's actually in the first book, but I still use it. So the one that came out in 2019 is a scorecard for success. And it's quite complicated in some respects, but you can gamify it and you can break AI down into 10 core areas, which really is all about how do I get started and how do I scale? And it covers everything from the right mindset, having the right approach to ethics, thinking about doing a proof of concept, and much, much more. Maybe we'll cover a little bit more about that as we go along. But it is about small iterations, showing that it works, having a clear business goal, and then beginning to roll it out across the organization.
You make it sound so simple. And I think, we've all been in the situation where we've seen businesses implement technology, whether, as you say, it's a point-to-point solution or it's a major multi-year implementation, and it fails. Digital transformation failures are prevalent in this industry. And we talk a lot about that on the podcast. AI in particular, I think we've seen lots of fits and starts. And, you quote PwC from their annual AI prediction survey, and they state, AI is hard. Too many AI investments end up as pretty shiny objects that don't pay off. Most companies have yet to adapt talent strategies, which you spoke to, organizational strategies, business strategies, development methodologies, and risk mitigation for a world that moves at AI speed. That sounds hard. What other people and process elements of AI do you think leaders need to consider to make an investment pay off beyond, obviously, the talent?
Such an important question. I think the need is absolutely critical, the most essential. If you don't have a valid, legitimate need for AI, what problems do we have that need to be solved, then it can become that pretty shiny object. So it's being clear on your goals, what you're trying to accomplish. So AI might not actually be the right answer. There might be some business analytics, perhaps, for a different type of project that you need. So what we're really saying here is let's not embark on a vanity AI project. Let's work out what is it that needs to be adjusted, that needs to either help reduce some kind of we'll call it the 3Ds, the dirty, dull, and dangerous. Can we increase revenue? Can we reduce some of the boring, monotonous tasks that we need to do? So that need is an important one. The next one I would say really is data. This AI we're talking about is viable now. It hasn't been viable for like 7 decades, for 70 years, because we didn't have enough data or the right kind of data, and because it's now cost effective. We've got cheaper processing power. So today, AI is really a data fueled technology. So people need to have a clear understanding of the data they need, what they're going to get from it, how they can ethically collect it and manage it. And if they don't do that, then they're getting into difficult situations. I could carry on with agility and culture and much, much more. But, I thought we'd sort of start with those two.
I think it makes sense, foundationally. And as you mentioned, this maturity model that you can use in your book, where you can break it up and kind of understand where you are in each of those areas, I think is very important. And as you say, AI might not be the right solution for a business problem just because it is sexy.
Absolutely. So in the first book, for example, to that point, Kim, people were being mandated by their CEOs, open up your shopping bag and buy some AI. This is flavor of the month. And then I think the case studies that I researched, the companies and the vendors for the last couple of years for this second book, there was much more pragmatism, much more realism, much more of a desire to invest in things that were going to make a difference rather than just having that shiny tag that would help with evaluation, for example.
Right. No, that's excellent to hear. One of the things that we have been working with our clients on for many, many years, and to your earlier point, it is really starting to pay off, is just improving that customer journey through AI. We call it journey science. But, so many brands are chasing personalization as a key capability. I'm curious, have you seen some recent real innovative approaches where AI has been key in driving personalization given its maturity at this point?
Again, another great question. I've got a whole chapter on personalization in the books. That it's this paradox of personalization, which is so interesting. Think about, again, not what AI isn't. AI isn't this big shiny robot taking our jobs. If we, as a bank, as a retailer, as a PR agency, as a law firm, if we can get big data insights on our clients, on our customers, we can give them a very personalized, granular service. And that is absolutely crucial. So I think what we're starting to see is AI baked into the background of our experience to a point where we don't even realize it's happening. So I've got lots of examples of brands in all different sectors using it. So, we're typically thinking of the product recommendations from the Netflix and the Spotifys, but we're starting to see personalization extend to out of house marketing, with some companies using data from their consumers' devices to give them a personalized advert on display signage in their shops. Or it might be a chat bot, where we're seeing a brand take that to the next level with a voice bot and tailoring that experience. It might be voice biometrics, where we're, seeing all different sort of possibilities come out there. For example, matching people to the right agent or putting a senior citizen into a priority queue. So that kind of ability to identify VIP customers, fast track their service, is exploding on the personalization side. And I think it's taking an organization from treating us customers in a very homogenous way to being able to give us what we need when we want it, but hopefully in a non-creepy way.
Right. That's always the trick, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The non-creepy way.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm wondering if you could give a business leader one piece of advice around AI that they could act on today, what would it be?
Don't delay. I genuinely mean that. I think people do need to move fast because they will get left behind. So that's an important one. So move fast, but do your due diligence. Be careful not to jump straight in and make a major investment. Do some small iterations based around a need and based around your business plan. That's probably 3 in 1. I'm being greedy, but that would be my advice.
No, that's excellent advice, as we both know. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your time today and for your expertise. And we will definitely make sure that we have your book and everywhere we can purchase it in the show notes. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for a great interview.
Now it's time for our namesake segment, What If, So What, and most importantly, Now What? Jim, Katie gave us a lot of examples of AI in the wild and how easy it could be to get started experimenting with AI in your business. What stood out to you?
Hey, Kim. This is another great topic on AI. I love talking about AI. I could talk about it all day long. By the way, you're talking to a chatbot. We thought we'd do an experiment on the AI episode. I'm not really here.
Good,
yeah.
Very good training of that chatbot.
Exactly. You may be using it and you didn't know it. So we'll have to take a Turing test later. As we nerd out. But yeah, like I said, I'm really glad to have another AI expert on the show. It's a topic that continues to evolve every day. I think there's some interesting things behind it. I think some of the hype that we saw just maybe 5-10 years ago, my estimation is sort of reduced. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a sign that, to me, that AI hype has sort of crossed the chasm. Mm-hmm. It's sort of normalized. It's sort of calmed down a little bit. So that's just kind of a broad assessment. But, it's one of those things that just continues to evolve every single day, right? Whether it's a new algorithm or more data or more accuracy because of more experimentation. I just think there's a lot of cool stuff happening behind the scenes. We'll come back to that. But she mentioned a couple things in the interview. The first thing that stuck out to me is she said that AI started in the 50s, right? Sometime in the 50s. So I did a little homework. I wanted to share something that was pretty interesting. I think what she was referring to is going back to a program that was developed by some academics called the Logic Theorist. It was a program, I assume this was written on a mainframe or an abacus, I'm not sure. But back in I didn't get the implementation down, but the Logic Theorist was created in 1955, and it was a program that would mimic basic human problem-solving skills. And they used what's called a search tree and deductive reasoning, which is basically a game of 20 questions. And if you've ever done that, you can think of something, and I'll ask you a few questions until I get it right. Was it a noun, verb? Was it a plant or an animal? Was it green? Was it? And so there was that type of logic. And it's funny because I used to have a little portable 20 questions game that would play with my kids in the car. And that's exactly what it was. So kind of goes back as the original AI program. It didn't really go anywhere. And the concept wasn't really new. But then I realized that, some of us have heard of a big event in 1997. So we're going back now 25 years when IBM's Deep Blue supercomputer beat Garry Kasparov, the Russian chess master, in a very famous showdown. And I thought, wow, that was 25 years ago. So we went from 20 questions to chess, and where are we now? And so I just thought the idea of the evolution from imagination to really making it everywhere it really stood out to me. And then the other thing that she mentioned that I spent a little time on was the 3Ds.
Yes, that was great. That was great.
It was great to hear that because it was something I hadn't heard of in a long time. As a refresher for anyone, it was the 3Ds applied to robots, and they would do jobs that were dull, dirty, and or dangerous. So these are the jobs that humans would do that robots would replace. So dull jobs being very repetitive and tedious things like picking orders in a fulfillment center. Of course, we literally see robots doing that in, Amazon is famous for that. But I know that there are a lot of small retail brands that have these really cool implementations in their distribution centers.
Yes.
Right. So very tedious job, dirty jobs, just unpleasant, maybe hazardous things like coal mining. It's a dirty job. We're still in a talent crunch, right? In a resource crunch. How do you find someone to do that job? And then, of course, dangerous things, also coal mining or bomb disposal. These are not really brand new things, but I really started thinking about the 3Ds and robots and how that might affect our thinking around AI later. So I'll come back to that later. But what stood out for you, Kim?
I do like the 3Ds. It's a good reminder on how to think strategically on how to use AI and automation really in a lot of digital business environments. I think specifically the dull of the Ds. But I mean, when you think about some of the jobs in social media looking at potentially violent images or whatnot that humans actually are having to do right now, maybe dangerous comes into play there. It struck me as Katie was talking and when she was talking about how, AI is around us every day. And I was sort of skeptical. And then I realized she's absolutely right. Even in the consumer space, basic AI functionality, for example, in chatbots is already ubiquitous. Everybody has a chatbot. As a consumer, I think you probably have experienced frustration that the chatbot hasn't been trained properly, but it's there. As I've said before, I really think the pandemic was a catalyst for so many things, including AI, where there were staffing shortages or there was a shift to digital and there wasn't a lot of agility necessarily in the technology right off the bat. So I think that is part of why AI has become so ubiquitous in the past few years. But I still can't get over her statement. There's no business over time that will not be an AI business in some form. It's such a profound statement.
Yeah.
But after listening to some of her examples, I realized she's probably right. And most businesses probably aren't leveraging AI enough to get there. What do you think? What's the what if?
Well, I wonder why, like today, like you said, this is definitely one of those things that if you're not doing it today, you better be planning on it, because the prospect of being revolutionary for some brands. And I know there's one brand client of ours who has made AI sort of the backbone of their business. It's the way that in driving their pricing, their markdowns and some of their merchandising. I mean, they're pretty clear about it. Everything else, fulfillment and, their commerce functionality, that's all table stakes. Like there's no differentiation there. Like, but they've really fine tuned, a lot of retailers have done it too. But I think of those small use cases that have to prove themselves out. And I really think that's what maybe is holding people back. They feel intimidated by this. They feel like it's revolutionary. And I think what we'll try and unpack here is how businesses can find the right spot to apply it. And I think what that's going to take is the what if, a little roundabout way to get here, is what if you could prove that it's going to work? And I think about this sort of sci-fi basis, the hype we see. This is a concept that's been around for, hundreds of years. Like robots are not a new idea,
Right.
but AI is relatively new. And so it's about getting started. And I didn't want to focus too much on, just do something, do anything. I do think we have to build on Katie's advice, and you've got to prove it out. So what if you could prove it tomorrow?
I think it's provocative because we've talked many times. How do you prove an investment will work? How do you prove that your research and your
Right.
data is accurate? How do you prove anything? So it's provocative, but I think the big so what is what we've been saying. We need to work hard in business to separate this notion of AI as sci-fi and realize it's been used for years. Dynamic pricing, dynamic merchandising is a great example that you brought up. That's AI, but nobody called it AI. They called it
Right.
dynamic merchandising, rules-based merchandising. Now we just have a layer of sophistication that we can put on to increase the accuracy and the automation and improve efficiency. So I do think to prove it, it's just like anything else that we've been talking about. It's that starting small, testing and learning, and given some of that hesitancy around AI, thinking a lot about how to install that test and learn culture. So it sounds very simple, yes, experimentation, test and learn. But I think the key is, as Novella talked about in one of our previous episodes, educating your teams as to what it is, what it's not, and setting the stage for a cultural shift. No, the culture has to be, like you said, where do we find these tiny little use cases to prove it out? And that starts building a foundation of test and learn. But I also hear Katie when she talked about needing the right team and the right talent to support AI initiatives. So I think it's education and making sure you have the right skill set, because you're not going to prove it if you have the wrong talent. And we still see a gap in a lot of instances when it comes to data and AI and automation. But what's the now what? Now, we seem basic again, but AI, now what?
By the way, I'm glad you brought up experimentation, because I do think that is, there's a loop, right? That we've talked about. You form a hypothesis, you make a case, you plan for experimentation and measurement, and you keep trying. And so it's funny, how do you prove it's going to work? Well, how do you prove that it did work or it didn't work? So again, I guess the now what is really starting to get your mind into sort of building a hypothesis and defining the problem that needs to be solved. She made a great comment. Don't embark on a vanity AI project. Mm-hmm. That's another thing we probably could have unpacked, which is, well, what does that mean? Is that, am I just trying to make a big splash? Is it just something that is highly visible? It's very customer facing. Are you just trying to do a proof of concept, or is it really just a proof of technology? You really have to start thinking about, having clear and present value. What is this going to change? Am I going to work faster? Is it going to have a better result? Am I going to reduce errors? You can find very small wins to do that. It's got to have some practical value. And there will be implementation challenges for sure. We talked about talent shortages. There will definitely be data issues. Do you have the data? Can you get to the data? But I think when it comes to where you can prove it, I think the now what, and I would ask people to do, is go back to the 3Ds, dull, dirty, and dangerous. Sounds like a band or maybe a Netflix series, that we could start.
It's a series.
Is it a series?
I like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's a series.
We'll submit that. I could really think of that as a sort of a trigger for people to think about what is ripe for automation. And that's kind of the easiest one, right? What are things that are tedious, that are dull, that are just done over and over again and are ripe for automation? I hear the word automation coming up a lot from our data and intelligence team. I was thinking about this as a different way to think about dirty jobs in this, in the business, in the digital sense. Maybe they're dull, but they don't happen often. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's an acquisition, or we're migrating products across, from one platform to another, or content. That's probably even better one. It's dull. It'll be tedious. Doesn't happen often, but it's kind of a dirty job. Like, okay, we're aligning our SKUs. We're aligning our product categories. We're aligning our customers again. These customer numbers are all over the place. How do we do financial consolidation in those events? Again, they don't happen a lot, but they do happen enough, and they need, they need to move quickly. But, I think AI also drives accuracy, and I think that kind of I was thinking of the dangerous elements, so how do you prevent things from going wrong? And so I think if you think about those, and maybe we can develop a little matrix, Kim, on how to think about that. But I think there are ways to think very, very small in this case, again, dull, dirty, and dangerous, and find a way where you can incorporate some sort of, and we'll start with automation, some sort of taking the sort of human element out of it. Another use case I really like is around digital asset management. And I think everyone can relate to this. You have some sort of photo library, or, if you're a Google or Apple person, maybe you're totally off the grid, but, the tagging faces, right? Visual recognition. You start to, that's AI at work. You take 5 photos. Yes, that's Karen. Now the machine knows all the photos with Karen. So, apply that to documents, apply that to all the attributes, and meta tagging of things. There's a lot of automation that can play. And there are a lot of solutions for that as well. Those are all sort of point solutions. And I think this is a great ways to start to prove it out. You actually have to think small to think big. How's that?
I like that. I like that a lot. The digital asset management, AI and automation in particular, it's such a pain point that I think a lot of organizations don't value the information enough to staff it. And they just let that, I'll call it technical debt or mess, build up. But so it's a great use case, like you said, kind of low risk too, to get something, a small point solution to start cleaning up some of that information. I think that's a great use case.
Kim, you said technical debt. I'm going to invent a new buzzword, since we started off as, I think we're in a competition for the buzziest of buzzwords. I'm inventing a new buzzword called digital debt.
Oh, that's very good.
There we go.
That's very good.
Yeah. And just everyone, I'm not that serious, but maybe I am.
Well, thanks, Jim, for the thoughts. And thanks again to Katie King for the great discussion. Check out her book, AI in Business. There are some really great case studies and very pragmatic advice on how to get started with AI if you're still debating where to take that first step in your AI journey. Please rate and subscribe to us on your favorite platform. Until next time, keep asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what?
You've been listening to What If, So What? The Digital Strategy Podcast from Perficient with Jim Hertzfeld and Kim Chopek. We want to thank our Perficient colleague, JD Norman, for our music today. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at Perficient.com. Thanks for listening.